We're up and running. Talk to me. Just let's start with, we knew the backlog has always been there. No one was expecting it to disappear. Has the backlog increased, or is the state now having to pay more expenses that is going to take us to this $8 billion?
I think, there's different configurations that get us to where this problem exists, but it still comes out pretty much the same way because, again, we've had to pay back pension costs that we did not do last year, so that takes up some slack. We've had to pay back a Medicaid match that we missed, so that's taken up some slack. We've got bonds that have to be paid, and the bondholders, want their interest, and that has to be paid. We've got employee health insurance that has to be paid. We've got lapse period spending, which will come in after the normal payment cycle here for the state, so that's got to be paid. We've got millions of dollars in corporate refunds that have to be repaid. I mean, it all adds up. And ultimately, you still get to the legislature, which has not made the necessary cuts, because that is still the primary problem that keeps this whole issue going and fueling it, which is you got to cut spending. Spending is the problem. All right, and you can't do anything, and you can't build, and you can't go forward, and you can't progress unless you really suck it up and start making the decisions legislatively and in the governor's office to cut programs, to cut duplication, cut boards and commissions, to cut agencies that maybe don't work or consolidate them. I mean, you got to do some digging here and really make it happen, and that has not happened.
Some of these expenses that we're going to have coming up before the end of the year, I don't know if it's proper to say that they are a result of this newfound fiscal discipline that the House at least seems to be interested in right now. We're actually going to pay employee health.
Yeah.
We're going to pay the pension in cash, and that sort of restricts the cash flow where in years past you could play a few games. Is some of this just a result of Illinois finally now starting to look to pay its bills and realizing that there's a lot of bills out there that we never could pay?
Yeah, I think there is some responsibility coming into the picture now, which I'm very pleased to see, but more needs to happen. There is some low-hanging fruit of easy cuts that can be made. We've given a list of close to $1 billion. I know the Republican Senate has come up with the list. There are other lists floating around. Start looking at these lists. And, you'll have a first tier of cuts that will probably not be as consequential. Your second tier of cuts might be a little more difficult to deal with, and then you'll get to the hard ones. But, it's not like we're the only state that's having problems, but we are certainly the worst state in terms of how we have handled them and allowed them to amass.
If the unpaid or the backlog or the dollar number that you're using goes from 4.5 to 8, what does that mean for pharmacists or nursing homes or school districts? Are they going to fall further behind? Is their wait going to be longer? I know that you've asked for a long time for the freedom to be able to pay people, even if it's not what they're owed, just a little bit in a timely fashion. By going to now $8 billion by in a relatively short amount of time, does that mean that some people are going to have to wait longer, or we have to pay the employee health insurance? We can't make them wait, so does a pharmacist downstate now wait even longer?
Well, there are certain must-dos. I mean, you have to make the payroll. That's by law. You've got to. I mean, it's got to be done. You've got to make sure that your bondholders are paid by law. That's a done deal. So now after that comes everybody else. And we have to make sure that we get these payments out as quickly as possible. Somewhere we might rush a little more if we see somebody in dire straits. We certainly are going to look at hospitals, nursing homes, programs for the poor, the sick, the old, the young, so that they're not left hanging out to dry. But and we really, I still say that if we could partially pay in an orderly fashion, but our computers are so old here, okay? They go back to 1996. We cannot get the programs in order to try and make these partial payments without throwing the place in the chaos. So I don't know, we're going to work on that, but we're not there yet, okay? That's got to come. So much has just been left, and we're just going to kick that can down the road, kick the can down the road. Well, that can is here, and I am going to scream about it because it can be done. But again, we need the legislature to stop kind of going off in these little side issues, these tangential issues, which I know are important to legislators. When I was one, it was important to me too, because there is only one issue facing this state, and that is the 800-pound gorilla that's sitting out in the middle of the Capitol, and it's called the budget. That has to get done, and there have to be cuts. There have to be cuts. And you can't start talking borrowing or anything else, which gets us deeper in the hole, until these cuts are made.
Whose numbers are you using when you say we have to make cuts? Because there are 5 or 6 different revenue projections. You have the governor's proposed budget that spends about 35. The House is talking somewhere in the range of 32. Do you have a number? I know you said there are a billion or so in cuts, but where would you like to see the total budget start at, and you know, how far reduced? Are we talking a $30 billion discretionary budget, 27?
Well, as we see these various budget numbers float around, I would be always inclined to try and take the most conservative one, and then be surprised that we hit it right. I don't want to overreach on this. So I'd have a tendency to start looking at one that was a bit more conservative. And then if there's anything left over, well, we can pay some bills. I'll have plenty of bills. I got no problem.
I thought that, and this was a question asked to me when we were talking about this in the office. Somebody from one of the papers down south said, I thought the tax increase was, isn't this why we raised taxes? I think people, I don't know if they were told, I think people had the impression that raise the taxes, Illinois won't be broke anymore when we raise the taxes, but
I think that was the assumption. I don't know that anybody ever really got into the specifics of this tax increase, but I think that the public, and rightfully so, how can you not assume that the single biggest tax increase to hit this state, especially in its economic dire straits, is, you would think it would go back to paying off back bills and getting us, intact. And that didn't happen because, again, we didn't make a pension payment last year. Bingo, 2/3 of it went there right away. 1/3 of it went to a Medicaid program, federal government one, that we had a match that we missed. Now we paid it up. It's gone. It is gone. And the unclaimed bills, right now I've got, for those who still have to pay their bills, and I know I go crazy every month when I get my bills, which are minuscule compared to this, I have 208,635 vouchers which need to be paid, totaling right now $4.52 billion in our office. That's a lot of money.
The governor's office, I'm sure, will say this is why we want to borrow. They proposed $5.7 billion in borrowing that would pay off the 4.5 backlog and pay off some of these other. Why not at this point borrow?
Because we've been borrowing right along, and it's the same problem that you've had right along. It just forces the issue more and more of debt. You are going deeper and deeper in debt because you got to pay that back. Now you got to pay it back with interest. It's not like we get the money for free or anything. There's no daddy Warbucks out there who's going to hand us a check here. So this is not the time to be talking about borrowing. It is the time to be talking about spending. That is the single crux. That is the crux of all this, is spending. Unless you deal with the spending and the cutting, anything else like this is meaningless, and all you're doing is making the situation worse.
Last question I have, what do you tell somebody who's going to read this in the paper tomorrow, see this on TV, that is waiting for a check from the state? I mean, how do you say, you can only say I'm sorry or I understand enough?
Well, we have people calling here every day asking about checks. And again, we will always try and make sure if there is a dire situation, we'll see if we can kind of get into that rather quickly. But other than that, I cannot pay bills with money I don't have. And so as soon as I have it, I will pay, and certainly I will do it as quickly as possible. But especially with the antiquated systems, the antiquated mechanics, the dependency on paper, the fact that money is not coming in, that the economy still has not broken well in our favor, all of that taken into consideration, we still, and no cuts, of course, most importantly on the part of the legislature, we're not there yet.